November 1237 year, the Mongols, supported by the Tatars, began their full-blown invasion of Rus, having overrun Volga Bulgaria the previous year. The army was led by Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan. In Genghis Khan's will, Batu was left all land west of the Volga. All he had to do was conquer it. The first city to bear the brunt of the Mongols was Ryazan. Ryazan held out just 6 days. The city was completely destroyed and all its civilians were slaughtered. Then the army from Rus met the Mongols outside Kalama in January 1238. Although Kulkan, a son of Genghis Khan, fell at the battle, the Mongols were again victorious. The Prince of all Rus, Vsevolod Jurayevich, had no choice but to flee back to the city of Vladimir, the capital of the principality. After the rout of Kalama, Batu unquestionably aimed for Vladimir, the principality's capital, however, leaving Moscow in the rear with a fully capable army, additionally reinforced by the defeated forces at Kalama, was not an option. Batu was clearly displeased because, instead of chasing Vsevolod directly to the capital, he now had to march towards a lesser-known city on the periphery, where opportunities for sustenance were scarce. While Batu was on his way to Moscow, Vladimir, the son of Grand Duke Yuri Vsevolodovich of Vladimir, and Governor Philip acted swiftly and energetically to fortify the city. At that time, Moscow was a small town on the periphery, but it stood out with robust defensive structures, a wall crafted from pine logs, with battle platforms covered by a gable roof, log towers, and a well-fortified entrance to the fortress. Taking such a city was no easy task. Upon Governor Philip's orders, warriors set fire to the settlement area outside the fortified wall, preventing the use of townspeople's dwellings by potential invaders. Prince Vladimir and Governor Philip focused on reinforcing the walls, increasing weapon supplies, and ensuring sufficient food to at least delay Batu's advance and potentially trap his army within the walls of Moscow. The defenders also prepared Borovitsky Hill, where the fortress was situated. They meticulously poured water on the slopes to create ice, making it challenging for anyone to climb the city fortifications. On a January evening in 1238, Batu and his army approached Moscow. The warriors, stationed on patrol, observed a few Mongol patrols in the evening twilight. They promptly reported their findings to the prince. The defenders of Moscow did not close their eyes for a wink all night, peering into the darkness and listening to the distant noise approaching from the horde. When the first rays of the sun illuminated the outskirts of Moscow, the defenders saw a dense ring of enemies surrounding the fortress. Batu examined the fortifications of the city and concluded that such a small town would not offer serious resistance. The Mongol leader decided against deploying siege weapons, thinking that simultaneous attacks would be sufficient to break the city's resistance. The defenders of the city decided, under no circumstances, to engage in battle outside the defensive structures and to fight the invaders only from the walls. All morning, the Mongols prepared ladders and felled trees in the cross-shaped forests, using the logs to construct large shields and awnings for rams. However, they refrained from approaching the walls due to fear of Russian archers. The defenders of the fortifications saw the vast Mongol army besieging the fortress. They saw the Khan's tent in the distance. Preparations were complete, commands echoed, and the horde attacked. It appeared as if a colossal dark wave was rolling towards Moscow, ready to overwhelm the fortress. It didn't happen. Arrows showered down from the walls, and the attackers fell, shielding themselves. They stubbornly climbed icy slopes, aiming to escape archer range quickly. Reaching the log wall, Mongols set up ladders, but stones and boiling substances rained down from the steppe inhabitants below. The Mongols on the stairs, attacked by defenders of Moscow using long poles and slingshots, were repelled. In cases where the Mongols reached the wall's top, Russian warriors set aside their bows and engaged in hand-to-hand combat, wielding axes. The fortress was surrounded. A fierce battle occurred along the wall's entire perimeter. Mongol commanders rotated tired troops and deployed fresh forces to attack, seeking a weak spot in the defense. Yet, Russian Governor Philip adeptly utilized the small defended territory, having sufficient troops to hold it. He also sent fresh warriors to replace the fatigued soldiers. Night had fallen, but the battle raged on by torchlight. Enraged mules persisted in climbing Moscow's walls. Thousands lay dead. But the horde's onslaught continued. Russians fiercely fought, preventing the enemy from entering the city. Morning came, but the battle continued with the same fury. And while Batu's successes looked more than doubtful, by order of the Khan, the Mongols began to drag bundles of firewood to the corner tower of the fortress. And when the pile reached an impressive size, they tried to set it on fire. But the defenders threw snow at the flaring fire and poured water on it. Unhappy, Batu ordered an attack on the gate. Despite a hail of Russian arrows, the Mongols persistently pushed the ram forward, and by noon, it reached the city gates. A heavy blow on the gate shook the tower to its foundation. Resin was poured from above, lighted torches and flaming brands were thrown, and heavy logs and stones were hurled. However, the iron-bound log continued its uniform blows. By the evening of the second day, the gates could not withstand the assault and fell apart with a crash, opening the way to the city for the steppe inhabitants. The Khan's cavalry charged into the gate tower passage, but collided with the spear-lined Muscovite defense. Defenders tirelessly fought, blocking the narrow passage with bodies. Mongols on foot attempted to engage, but defenders cut them down with long-handled axes, unable to break into the city. Mongol commanders recognized the need to change tactics. The assault persisted with clattering axes and driven saws in the enemy camps. Chinese engineers initiated the construction of catapults. The defenders' situation was challenging, but not yet critical. They maintained the entire fortification line. Despite losses, numerous soldiers perished, with a significant number sustaining injuries from enemy arrows. However, the small area of the fortress and the required number of troops, so far, allowed the defenders of Moscow to successfully repel the enemy storm. Overnight, the Muscovites repaired the gate, shifting all of the Khan's hopes onto Chinese engineers and stone throwers. By noon on the third day of the assault, the Mongol catapults were assembled, and the first stones were hurled towards the city. Initially, this caused no damage to the city fortifications as it took time for the shots to reach their target. However, everything changed when the Mongols aimed accurately. and a barrage of stone cannonballs and pots of oil rained down on Moscow. Stone shells smashed the roofs of the battlefields into splinters and demolished both defenders and attackers by the dozens. Within the city, the walls and towers quivered from the devastating blows, leading to fires breaking out. Some warriors hurried to extinguish them. The prince and governor realized that with half the city ablaze and walls crumbling, their only chance was to sortie and destroy the catapults, a risk they had avoided from the defense's start. The risk was immense. Prince Vladimir and Philip knew that a failed sortie would be disastrous and irreparable. Yet, sitting idle behind fortifications was equally futile. With the walls on the verge of collapse, it was clear that Mongols would enter the city and overwhelm the defenders. During the night, the city gates swung open, and the governor, leading his personal squad, launched an attack on the enemy positions near the siege weapons. Forming a wedge, heavily armed horsemen descended from Borovitsky Hill, catching the unsuspecting Mongols off guard. Russian soldiers held torches to swiftly ignite the siege equipment without delay. Russian battle cries echoed as their swords dispatched scattered Mongols. Attempts to block the rushing cavalry failed. To avoid death under hooves, the Mongols fled, abandoning their throwing machines. Some Russians stayed to break and set fire to the stone throwers, while others pursued the fleeing enemies. But something happened that the experienced commander feared more than once or twice. Russian troops made this mistake. They got carried away in pursuit of the retreating enemy, and this always led to sad consequences. This time was no exception. Philip rushed after the soldiers, attempting to redirect them. But in the excitement of the chase, no one listened. Only when the Khan's guard appeared ahead did the Russians come to their senses. But it was too late. Warriors who destroyed throwing weapons left for the fortress, while the rest, with Governor Philip, were cut off from the cities and perished in fierce battles with the Mongols. The Russians fought desperately, realizing escape was impossible. They sought to sell their lives dearly. The battle concluded when the last Russian fell on the blood-stained snow, and the wounded Governor Philip was dragged to Batu on a lasso. Filled with rage, Khan witnessed the siege engines ablaze. Many guardsmen were cut down, and his greatest anger was directed at those who fled the battlefield, disgracing the honor of a Mongol warrior. Retribution for the main culprit, Russian Governor Philip, was severe. Mongol warriors cut him into pieces and scattered them across the field. After executing the Moscow military commander, knocking resumed in the Mongolian camps. Axis and Chinese engineers built new siege engines, reigniting the assault on the fortress walls. Morning came, and the Mongols failed to breach the fortress. Fierce hand-to-hand combat persisted on the walls, with Russian valor proving stronger than Mongolian courage. Russian warriors used swords and axes to repel the invaders, throwing down the dead bodies of Khan's warriors, causing streams of blood to flow down the wooden flooring. But new thousands of nomads continued to advance towards the Borovitsky Hill, unstoppable avalanche. In the afternoon, the siege engines began to rumble again, and the stone hail fell on the city walls. The Chinese engineers outdid themselves. They continued to assemble new stone throwers and introduce them into battle as they were ready. Prince Vladimir and the warriors witnessed it all, but couldn't halt the enemy, as too many soldiers were lost in the night battle. With insufficient strength for a new attack, the Russians decided to fight within the city to the best of their strength and military skill. All night, Enemy catapults destroyed walls, but Moscow fought to resist the Mongol horde's onslaught. Defender losses increased rapidly, as they couldn't counter the enemy's siege technology. Leaving the fortifications was impossible, as any unguarded section of the wall would be immediately captured by the Mongols. The defenders of the city fought and died where the prince and the governor placed them. On the fifth day, a wall shattered by stone cannonballs crumbled, and thousands of Mongols surged through the breach. Prince Vladimir hurried towards them with his personal retinue, taking cover behind large red shields. The warriors repelled the initial wave of attackers, pushing them back. However, a second wave followed, and the battle resumed. Warriors from other sectors of the defense rushed to the aid of the prince. However, the Mongols took advantage of this, and in some places broke through into the city. Moscow, ablaze, turned into a battlefield. Fighting unfolded on walls, in narrow streets, and courtyards, spreading hand-to-hand combat throughout the city. Eventually, the heavy Mongol cavalry breached the fortress. Prince Vladimir and the few surviving warriors broke through to the princely court and barely managed to slam the gates behind them, in front of the Mongol horsemen pursuing them. Meanwhile, the battle raged on the city wall as Mongols attacked from both sides, but defenders fought back desperately. Merciless killings and dwindling Russian numbers marked the struggle, while steppe inhabitants continued to climb the city fortifications in an endless stream. Soon the battle on the fortress wall died down, as all its defenders fell. Of the warriors who fought at the breach, none survived. Surrounded on all sides, they died under enemy arrows. After knocking down the gates of the princely court with a log, the Mongols rushed into the courtyard. Prince Vladimir, surrounded by a dozen soldiers from his personal squad, stood on the porch, tightly clutching swords, prepared to sell their lives dearly. The Mongols rushed up the steps of the prince, and the warriors chopped them down tirelessly, and one after another the Mongols fell from the porch onto the bloody snow. Mongolian archers on horses shot the prince's bodyguards with well-aimed shots. Leaving Vladimir alone, enemies surrounded him, disarmed him, knocked him down, and tied him with belts. The prince was dragged into the courtyard, where the Sotnik threw a lasso over his shoulders. They then drove a horse through Moscow's streets, attempting to swiftly deliver the captive to Batu as an honorable prize. Vladimir initially pursued them, but eventually tripped and fell. The Mongol only looked back and continued to lead the captive Russian prince through the snow on the lasso towards Khan's headquarters. The Mongols, enraged by the desperate resistance, staged a terrible massacre in the fortress and killed the entire population. On January 20th, 1238, Moscow fell, and the mules, following the collapse of the defense, razed it to the ground. Based on the above, the version of the defense of Moscow that we outlined above has every right to exist. But even if you do not take it into account, it is clear that the defeat of the Russian regiments in the battles for Ryazan, Kalamna, and Moscow largely predetermined the further development of events, which were not at all rosy for the Russian lands and people. Thanks for watching this video. You can like, share, and comment. It helps me a lot.